It all started with the sound of a chair scraping against the polished classroom floor, too loud, too sudden. Everyone turned. At the front of the room stood Principal Patrick Whitmore, tall, stern-faced, and flanked by two administrators. His eyes weren't scanning the class. They were locked on one person, Jake Miller. A silence fell, the kind that presses into your chest. Even Mr. Jennings, the usually chatty chemistry teacher, took a step back, uncertain. "Jake Miller," Principal Whitmore said, voice steady but cold, "gather your things. As of today, you're no longer a student at Southridge Academy." There was a pause. 1 second, 2, 3. Laughter. Somewhere in the back, Travis Harrington, golden boy of the school, son of a board member, gave a mock gasp. "Wait, is this actually happening?" Jake didn't move. His face didn't change, but his hands, resting on the worn straps of his backpack, clenched just slightly. "Why?" he finally asked, voice calm but with that edge, the one that said he already knew the answer. Principal Whitmore adjusted his tie. "Your behavior today was disruptive, and your repeated disregard for the school's code of conduct leaves us with no choice." Jake's jaw tightened. "I answered a question." "You corrected the teacher," Whitmore snapped. "In front of the class, with attitude." Jake looked over at Mr. Jennings, who avoided eye contact. He could feel 28 pairs of eyes watching. Some curious, some confused, a few, like Lily Monroe's, full of quiet outrage. "Isn't Southridge about excellence?" Jake asked. "I gave the right answer." Whitmore ignored the comment. "Your father will be notified. You're dismissed." And just like that, the boy in flannel and dusty boots stood up, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked out. No shouting, no tears, just a slow walk past the same desks where he once imagined he'd become something more. No one said a word, except Lily. Barely a whisper, but Jake heard it. "You don't deserve this." But Jake had stopped believing in fairness a long time ago. Outside, the Texas sun was merciless, bright and hot over the pavement. Jake walked past the school gates, past the rows of expensive cars lined up in student parking, and out toward nothing. Nothing but dust, fields, and a whole world that never stopped reminding him, "You don't belong here." What no one knew, not Whitmore, not Travis, not even Lily, was that this moment, this exact humiliation, would be the turning point of everything. Because somewhere, not far from this very school, someone was watching, and within the next 24 hours, the life of Jake Miller, the farmer's son, would ignite like a wildfire. But not yet. Not just yet. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The wheels of Jake's rusty pickup crunched along the gravel road that led to Miller Farm. 20 acres of dry soil, a tired barn, and a weathered house that creaked with every gust of wind. It wasn't much, but it was home. Jake didn't slam the truck door when he got out, he never did. The door could fall off if you looked at it wrong. That's just how things worked out here. Fragile, barely holding on. He stepped onto the porch where a pair of boots already waited. Not his. Back early. The voice came from inside, deep and raspy. Jake didn't answer right away. He hated lying, but he hated the truth even more. Got out early. Chemistry review was short. The screen door creaked open, and out stepped his father, Walter Miller. 52 years old, but his face carried the kind of wear that made him look closer to 70. Sun-leathered skin, calloused hands, one knee always aching from the time the tractor flipped on a wet morning 3 years back. Walter looked at his son for a moment longer than usual. He could always tell when something was off. Jake sat on the porch swing and stared out at the field. "Principal kicked me out." Silence. Wind rustled the tall grass. A hawk cried somewhere overhead. Walter didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just sat down beside his son and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What happened?" he asked softly. Jake exhaled. "Corrected the teacher. Travis stirred things up. Principal acted like I spit in someone's face." Walter's hand tightened into a fist, then slowly relaxed. "All that money. All that damn money I saved for that school." Jake looked down at his boots. "I'm sorry." Walter shook his head. No, kid. Don't apologize for being smart. Don't apologize for being you." That night Jake sat at the kitchen table, lit by a single bulb that flickered every time the wind blew too hard. He opened the textbook he wasn't allowed to open in school anymore. Pages full of notes, doodles in the margins, equations he memorized like poetry. Every night for the past year, he stayed up late working through extra assignments, pushing himself harder than anyone asked him to. Not for grades, for a way out. He didn't hate the farm. He just hated that it was his only option. On the living room wall hung an old photo, Walter holding a younger Jake, maybe 7 years old, covered in dirt and smiling like he didn't know life could be so hard. And next to that, a faded picture of Marianne Miller, Jake's mom. She died when he was 9. Breast cancer, the kind that moved fast and didn't care how much you prayed. She was the one who taught him how to read before school ever did, who told him stories about scientists and astronauts and dreamers from towns just like theirs. She made him promise the night before she passed, "No matter what, Jake, promise me you'll never stop learning." And Jake had promised, even if learning got him kicked out of school. Around midnight, Jake finally closed the textbook. His eyes were red, his stomach empty. The house was quiet, save for the steady hum of the refrigerator. Older than he was, and just as stubborn. Before heading to bed, he scribbled something on a torn piece of paper and pinned it above his desk. Just 3 words, "Don't stop here." The world might have shut the door, but Jake Miller had no intention of staying outside. The next morning, Jake didn't go to school, obviously, but at Southridge Academy, his name was still the loudest thing in the halls. "Did you hear what happened to Jake?" Mr. Miller finally got the boot. He corrected Jennings again, like, "Dude, just shut up and know your place." It wasn't everyone, but it was enough people, the kind who always spoke a little louder when they thought they were better than you. And in a school like Southridge, being better wasn't about who worked hardest. It was about who your daddy played golf with, or whose last name was engraved on the science building. Lily Monroe stood quietly by her locker, eavesdropping on the gossip. Her hands trembled slightly as she shoved a textbook into her bag. She hated this school sometimes. She hated how quickly people turned their backs. She hated how no one said anything yesterday. Especially her, but fear's a funny thing. It sneaks up on even the brave. "Hey," a voice said behind her. It was Noah Peterson, the quiet, hoodie-wearing kid who always had earbuds in and kept his head down. He and Jake had been close since middle school. 2 outsiders, 1 brain. "Have you talked to him?" Lily asked, lowering her voice. Noah shook his head. "His phone's off." They both knew why. "Think he's okay?" she asked. Noah shrugged. "Jake's always okay, that's the problem." Back at the farm, Jake was in the barn, knee-deep in engine grease, fixing a busted generator, the kind of work that didn't require a GPA. His phone buzzed. "Lily, wish you were here. Everything feels wrong without you." He stared at the message, fingers frozen above the screen. He started typing, then deleted it. No reply. He didn't know what to say. That afternoon, Lily did something she'd never done before. She showed up at the Miller farm. When Jake opened the door and saw her standing on his porch, hair in a messy ponytail, Southridge, hoodie oversized over jeans, his mouth opened slightly. "You walked here?" Lily gave him a look. "You live 4 miles from school. I'm not made of glass, Jake." He stepped aside to let her in. The place smelled like coffee and oil and wood. It felt real, honest. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. Jake stayed standing. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." He sighed and finally sat down, arms folded over the table. "They act like I'm some kind of problem. Like showing up in boots instead of loafers makes me dangerous. You scare them," Lily said softly. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're smart, you don't play their game, and you don't need their approval. That terrifies people who grew up thinking the world belongs to them." He blinked. That was not what he expected. They sat in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just quiet. The kind of silence that fills the space between people who are starting to really see each other. Then Lily pulled a flash drive from her pocket and slid it across the table. "What's this?" Jake asked. "A video," she said, "of what really happened in class." Jake stared at it. You recorded it? She gave a guilty shrug. I record everything. Habit. My dad's a lawyer. Jake looked down at the flash drive, then back up at her. Why give it to me? Because you deserve to have it, she said, and because I believe you always have. Later that night, Jake watched the video. It showed everything. Travis instigating, Mr. Jennings faltering, Jake answering with logic and precision, and Whitmore storming in like he'd been waiting for an excuse. It was clear, obvious, and Jake knew something in that moment. He had a choice. He could let this all fade away and become just another story about how the world isn't fair, or he could do something about it, but he wouldn't do it alone. Lily and Noah were with him now, and whether Southridge liked it or not, Jake Miller wasn't going anywhere. Principal Patrick Whitmore leaned back in his leather chair, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock behind him, the only sound in his office. It was 6:02 p.m. Everyone had gone home, everyone but him. His fingers tapped slowly on the edge of his desk as he stared at the glowing screen in front of him. Emails, dozens of them, half from parents, the other half from board members, all of them asking the same question. Was the expulsion of Jake Miller justified? He clenched his jaw. Of course it was. But in truth, even he wasn't sure anymore. Just hours earlier, he'd stood tall in front of the school board president, Daniel Harrington, father of Travis, donor of the new science lab, and the man who all but owned Southridge Academy. Daniel had leaned in close, voice low but sharp. That boy doesn't belong here. He's a distraction. My son tells me he's causing problems in class again. Take care of it. And Patrick had nodded, because that's what you did when the hand that feeds you tells you to move. Jake wasn't the first kid from the wrong side of town to get edged out of Southridge, but he might be the first one smart enough, dangerous, enough to challenge how things worked. It was never about rules, it was about power, and power needed order. Back at home, Jake watched the video again, then again. Each time he noticed more, the smirk on Travis's face, the way Mr. Jennings froze when the principal entered. The flicker of embarrassment in his eyes, like he knew he was throwing Jake under the bus but didn't have the guts to stop it. Noah sat beside him at the kitchen table, laptop open, typing furiously. I can clean the audio, sharpen the footage, Noah said. We could post it online, get it to someone who matters. Jake hesitated. What if it backfires? Then it backfires, Noah replied. But at least we don't stay silent. Jake looked down at the flash drive again. His entire future, whatever future was left, seemed to rest inside a piece of plastic no bigger than his thumb. Let's do it, he said. Meanwhile, back at Southridge, Travis Harrington lounged on the hood of his car, a sleek black BMW gifted to him for his 16th birthday, and scrolled through TikTok. He found the video within minutes. Lily had uploaded it anonymously. Already, it had over 7,000 views. His stomach sank. He immediately called his dad. In the Whitmore household, Patrick's phone buzzed just as he sat down to dinner. He sighed, already knowing who it was. Daniel, he answered. I saw it. Fix it, came the reply, or we'll find someone who can. Click. Patrick stared at the silent phone. His wife called from the kitchen, asking about the potatoes. He didn't respond. His job, his reputation, even his retirement, all of it was on the line now, over a farmer's son. The next morning, Jake woke up to a text from Lily. Lily, you're trending. Jake didn't even know what that meant, but Noah did. You're on Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, everywhere. People are pissed. They're calling it class warfare. Jake blinked. Class what now? Just trust me. It's a good thing. But not everyone saw it that way. Later that day, a black SUV pulled up to the Miller farm. Two men in suits stepped out. One of them handed Jake an envelope. Inside, a cease and desist letter. Jake had to take the video down or face legal consequences. Jake looked at the letter, then at his father. Then at the empty fields behind them. He didn't crumble, he didn't flinch, he smiled, just a little. Looks like we hit a nerve. The game had changed, and Principal Whitmore was about to realize Jake Miller wasn't playing by their rules anymore. By sunrise, Jake Miller had gone from expelled farm kid to accidental folk hero, The video Lily posted had crossed 1.2 million views. And it wasn't slowing down. It was reposted by a teachers' union account, a college admissions coach, and then, the kicker, a viral education advocate on TikTok with 5 million followers. The caption? This student got expelled for being too smart. Watch the principal's face when he realizes it. By 9 a.m., Jake's name was trending on Twitter. By noon, there were hashtags, Justice for Jake, Let Jake Learn, Farm Boy Genius. People posted side-by-side clips comparing Jake's calm, intelligent answer to the principal's cold corporate reaction. Others shared their own stories of being overlooked, silenced, pushed out because they didn't fit in. Jake didn't have TikTok, or Twitter, or anything really. But Noah did, and he was practically shaking as he scrolled. Dude, there's a girl in Oregon who crocheted your face onto a pillow. You're like a movement now. Jake furrowed his brow. Why my face, though? Noah grinned. Internet's weird, man. Meanwhile, at Southridge Academy, chaos had officially arrived. The school's social media pages were flooded with angry comments. News vans parked outside the front gate. Reporters tried to interview students as they came in, but most were too scared to speak, except one. Lily stepped in front of a local station camera and said, without flinching, Jake Miller didn't break the rules. He broke their comfort, and that's why they kicked him out. Principal Whitmore watched the interview play on the flat screen in his office. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because his inbox was full and the school board was demanding a meeting that night. And somewhere, not in Texas, not even close, inside a New York City high-rise, a man in a tailored navy suit sat watching the same video. He was older, maybe late 50s, with silver at his temples and a face that had weathered 100 boardrooms and 1,000 bad headlines. But as he watched Jake speak, steady, sharp, unafraid, a rare smile curved his lips. He tapped the spacebar. Replayed the moment Jake stood his ground. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and said softly, "Found him. His name was Richard Dawson. You probably know him better as the billionaire founder of Dawson Dynamics, the tech empire. That helped build everything from satellite AI to smart farming tools. He'd come from nothing. A boy from Kansas whose hands used to look a lot like Jake's, cracked, raw, calloused from dirt and diesel fuel. He picked up the phone. "Get me the Miller kid," he said, "before someone else does." Back on the farm, Jake was elbow deep in the engine of an old pickup when Noah ran out of the house waving his phone. "Jake, someone from New York just emailed you. Some lady named Claudia. She says she's the executive assistant to a guy named—" He checked again. "Richard Dawson?" Jake's wrench clattered to the ground. "You okay?" Noah asked. Jake blinked. "Chaz, are you serious?" "Yeah. Says he saw your video and wants to talk. Like, personally. As in, a call. Today." Jake wiped his hands on an old rag, eyes locked on the horizon. Everything felt surreal. Like the sky had shifted just slightly, like maybe the universe wasn't ignoring him after all. He picked up the phone, heart pounding. Across the country, the call connected. "Jake?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Claudia Rhodes calling." "On behalf of Mr. Dawson." Jake cleared his throat. Yeah, this is him." She smiled on the other end, professional but warm. "Mr. Dawson saw your video. He's intrigued. He'd like to meet you as soon as possible." Jake blinked. "Like, in person? If you're open to it, we'll send a private car. You'll be on a plane tonight." Jake looked around the farm, at the tools, the chipped paint, the dusty fields, then out at the empty road that led to a future he was never supposed to have. His voice was steady when he answered. "Yeah, I'm open to it." Across the country, the winds were changing, and Jake Miller, the expelled farmer's son, was on his way to something far bigger than he ever imagined. The private jet didn't feel real. Jake had never been on a commercial flight, let alone one with white leather seats, wood-paneled walls, and a menu offering salmon with capers. Like that was a normal thing people just ate mid-air. The pilot had greeted him by name. The flight attendant had brought him hot chocolate instead of coffee. She said he looked like the type. He was still wearing his boots, the same ones he wore the day he got expelled. They squeaked against the polished floor, too loud in the quiet. The world he'd entered? Smooth, silent, expensive. When? The jet landed at a private terminal just outside New York City. A black SUV was already waiting. The driver, who called him Mr. Miller like it was the most natural thing, drove him straight into Manhattan. Jake leaned against the window, eyes wide as the city rose around him like steel giants. He'd never seen buildings this tall, lights this bright, sidewalks packed with so many people moving like they were late for something important. Then the car pulled into a roundabout, towering above him, Dawson Dynamics headquarters. 57 stories of steel, glass, and quiet intimidation. A logo carved into the stone like it had always been there. Jake stepped into the marble lobby, hands stuffed into the pockets of his flannel shirt. Heads turned. He didn't look like he belonged, but the woman at the front desk smiled at him like he was expected. "Mr. Miller, Mr. Dawson will see you now. Top floor." The elevator moved so fast, Jake's ears popped. When the doors opened, he stepped into a space unlike anything he'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the penthouse office, revealing the entire skyline. A long oak table stood to the side, and directly in front of him, behind a massive glass desk, stood the man himself. Richard Dawson, no tie, no smile, just calm eyes and presence. He looked like the kind of man who could walk into a burning building and still have time to fix his cufflinks. "Jake," he said, walking over with a firm handshake. "Thanks for coming." Jake shook his hand, steady. "Thanks for flying me across the country, I guess." Dawson gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Let's talk." They sat across from each other, Dawson pouring a cup of black coffee, Jake declining. The city glowed behind them. "I saw your video," Dawson said. "Then I saw your grades, your science scores, your essays. You're impressive." Jake shifted in his chair. "Didn't seem to impress Southridge." Dawson nodded slowly. "Southridge isn't in the business of developing minds. It's in the business of preserving status." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And what business are you in?" Dawson leaned forward, changing the game. He slid a tablet across the table. On it, a scholarship contract, full ride. Any university Jake wanted. All expenses covered. Jake blinked. "Is this real?" Dawson nodded. "Very. But I'm not just here to fund your future. I'm here to offer you something more." Jake didn't speak, just stared, wary. "I see something in you," Dawson said. "Conviction, grit, intelligence. Obviously. But more than that, you speak truth, even when it costs you everything." Jake stayed quiet, still trying to figure out if this was a dream or a setup. "I want to mentor you," Dawson said. "Not just as a student, as a future leader. Someone who can walk into rooms like this one and not flinch." Jake's heart thudded. "Why me?" Dawson stood, walking toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas. I was never supposed to leave, but I did. And now I make it a point to open doors for people who remind me of who I used to be." He turned, eyes sharp. "Doors no one else will ever open for you." Jake looked down at the tablet again. His name already typed into the top of the form. He could feel the weight of it, the choice, the offer, the risk. If he said yes, nothing would ever be the same. He looked up at Dawson. "What's the catch?" the billionaire smirked. "Smart." Question. "The catch is this. Once you walk through that door, you don't get to be invisible anymore. People will come for you. Just like they did at Southridge, but worse." Jake swallowed. "But you'll also get a chance to make real change," Dawson added. "The kind that terrifies people in power." He held out a hand. "You in?" Jake stared at the outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and shook it. "I'm in." Far below them, the city moved like it always had. But somewhere in that ocean of glass and noise, a new name was being whispered. Jake Miller. The farm boy who got expelled. The kid who didn't back down. The one who was about to change everything, Southridge. Academy had never been this quiet, not even during exams, not even during lockdown drills. The tension in the air felt thick, like something you could slice with a dull butter knife. And everyone, Teachers, students, staff knew it was about one name, Jake Miller. His story had hit Good Morning America that morning. There was even a tweet from a US senator calling him a brave example of why we need education reform, a student expelled for being smart, and a billionaire who swooped in to lift him up. It sounded like fiction, but it was very real, and Principal Patrick Whitmore was watching the narrative spiral like a wildfire he couldn't outrun. In his office, Whitmore stood by the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His phone buzzed, pause again. Another reporter, another parent. Another threat from the school board. He could still hear Daniel Harrington's voice from the night before barking through the phone. Fix it. Make it go away. You're losing control. But Whitmore knew the truth. It was already gone. He'd underestimated Jake. He'd assumed the boy would go home, sulk and fade. Instead, he became a storm. Across the quad, Travis Harrington was losing his mind in the student lounge. His TikTok comments were flooded with insults. People dug up old videos of him being a jerk. Even his lacrosse scholarship was under review. I didn't do anything, he shouted, pacing in front of his friends. You literally instigated the whole thing, muttered a girl from the debate team. Travis spun. He wasn't supposed to be here in the first place. He's a farmer. He doesn't belong at Southridge. The room went quiet. That word again. Belong. But people were starting to question what that even meant. Meanwhile, Lily and Noah sat side by side. In the library, laptops open. Inboxes flooded. Jake's been gone 2 days and already got a full ride. National press and the attention of a billionaire, Noah said, stunned. What's next? A Netflix docuseries? Lily half laughed. Wouldn't be surprised. But she was worried too. Something in her gut told her Southridge wasn't done fighting back. She was right. That afternoon, the school board sent out a formal notice. An emergency disciplinary review is being called to re-evaluate Mr. Miller's case, as well as the conduct of those involved in spreading unauthorized video footage. Translation? Jake wasn't the only one in the crosshairs now. Lily and Noah looked at each other. This is retaliation, Noah said. Straight up. But Lily stood up, voice strong. Then, let's give them a reason to be afraid. Later that evening, Jake sat across from Richard Dawson again, this time in a sleek downtown loft overlooking Central Park. His world had gone from hayfields to city lights in 48 hours, but even here, his mind was on Southridge. They're coming after Lily, he said. And Noah, for posting the video. Dawson nodded. They'll come hard. Desperation always hits loudest before it fades. Jake clenched his jaw. They think they can scare us quiet. Dawson leaned forward. So don't be quiet. He handed Jake a sleek brushed metal laptop. Start your story, tell the truth, and in your voice, let people see you. Not just what happened to you, Jake hesitated. I'm not a writer. You're a fighter, Dawson said. Same thing. That night, Jake opened the laptop, typed out the first sentence of a blog post that would go live the next morning. They told me I didn't belong. They were right, but not for the reason they thought. Back in Texas, Whitmore stared at his inbox as hundreds of new messages flooded in. But one email stood out, from the state's Department of Education. Subject line, Formal investigation initiated. Southridge Academy leadership practices. He didn't even open it. He just closed his laptop slowly because he knew the walls were finally closing in. Jake stared at the blinking cursor on the screen for what felt like an hour. It mocked him. He wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. He wasn't trying to be anything, really. He just wanted to tell the truth, not the kind they put in glossy brochures or school board press releases, but the real kind, the kind that hurt and still needed saying. He took a breath and started typing. They told me I didn't belong. They were right, but not for the reason they thought. I'm not from money. I don't wear polished shoes or carry a last name that unlocks doors. My hands are rough. I know how to fix an engine before I ever learned how to spell valedictorian, but I do belong in a classroom. I belong in a debate. I belong in every room where people are trying to shape the future. And so do a lot of kids like me. Kids whose stories never get told unless they're being kicked out. I got expelled not because I broke the rules. I got expelled because I made someone uncomfortable, because I knew something, because I had the nerve to speak. If that scares the people in power, maybe it should. Jake Miller. He hit post, and just like that, the internet broke again. The blog was picked up by BuzzFeed first, then NPR, Time, and 100 education advocates who had been waiting for a voice like his. Jake's writing was raw, smart, and undeniably real. It wasn't polished, but that's what made it powerful. He wasn't a spokesperson, he was a truth-teller. Back in Texas, Lily was in study hall when she saw the post go live. She read it once, then again. She didn't cry, not until she got to the last line. If that scares the people in power, maybe it should, she whispered under her breath. That's my boy. Noah, across the table, fist-bumped the air, and on the other side of campus, in a dark-paneled office, Principal Whitmore read it too. His hand tightened around a pen until it snapped. Jake Miller had just made it clear. He wasn't just coming back, he was coming back louder. The school board held an emergency meeting that night. They were on damage control now, voices raised, tempers boiling. This is a PR nightmare. The alumni donors are pulling back. There's a petition to reinstate the kid. It has 85,000 signatures in 2 hours. Whitmore tried to keep his tone calm. I followed policy. We don't discipline based on popularity. No, one board member fired back. But we don't survive when the entire country is watching. The next morning, Jake woke up to a flood of emails, some from other students, some from teachers across the country. But one caught his eye. Subject line: "We'd like you to speak at the National Student Equity Summit." Jake blinked. "Wait, what?" he clicked. They wanted him in D.C. next week. Keynote speaker, prime slot, all expenses paid. Jake looked over at Dawson, who was sipping coffee by the kitchen window of the loft. "I got invited to speak at a summit," Jake said, voice low, like with microphones. Dawson raised an eyebrow. "You're a storyteller now, this is what comes next." Jake shook his head. "I'm just a farm kid who got kicked out of school." "No," Dawson said quietly. "You're the reason. Other kids won't be." Later that day, Jake recorded a short video in Dawson's media room. Just him and the camera. No filters, no background music, just truth. This isn't about me anymore. It's about what happens when young people are told to shrink, to stop asking questions, stop showing up, stop being smart. We don't need fewer voices. We need more. So if you're out there, the kid who's too loud, too different, too curious, keep going, I see you. And you're not alone. He posted it. By nightfall, it had 5.6 million views. Back in Southridge, something strange happened the next morning. Someone wrote Jake's name in chalk on the front steps of the school. Then someone else added a line underneath it. "Question everything." By third period, half the school had Sharpie hearts on their hands. They called it Jake Day. And Principal Whitmore? He couldn't erase that. DC was a different beast entirely. When Jake stepped off the plane, the humidity hit him like he hadn't expected it to be so warm in the middle of October, but the heat wasn't what made him feel out of place. It was the suits, the press, the camera flashes. Everything screamed important. And then there was the stage. It was massive. More like an arena than a conference hall. The stage stretched out with huge screens, lights, and a crowd that felt more like a crowd of adults than students. But Jake, he felt smaller than ever. He stood at the back, leaning against a wall, his jacket a bit too tight across his shoulders. His hands were in his pockets, and he was trying not to look out of place. "You good?" Dawson asked, standing beside him, his voice calm as always. Jake nodded, but it didn't feel real. "I don't know. I keep thinking, am I even supposed to be here?" Dawson smiled. "You belong. It's just time for the world to catch up." Jake didn't respond. He didn't feel like he belonged, not in this sea of expensive suits and polished shoes. These weren't his people. His people were back in that small town, the ones who worked their asses off and got little recognition for it. As the conference began, the crowd settled, and Jake was introduced by a smiling host who barely seemed to understand what he was about to walk into, and then his name was called. "Please welcome Jake Miller, student, writer, and advocate for true equity in education." The applause was loud. Too loud. Jake felt his chest tighten, his palms sweat. He stood up, walking toward the stage. The crowd's eyes felt like lasers. He took the microphone from the stand, looked out over the sea of people, from student representatives to congressmen, and he froze. This wasn't Southridge. This wasn't high school. This was real life, and suddenly everything felt so much bigger. "I'm not here because I have a perfect story," Jake began, his voice wavering slightly but steadying as he went. "I'm here because every student out there who's been told they don't belong, I'm here for them." He paused. The crowd was silent, waiting. It's easy to look at a kid from a farm, a kid who works with his hands and thinks, "Oh, he's just not cut out for this." But let me tell you something. It's not about where you come from. It's about where you're going. Jake took a deep breath and started telling his story. The real story. The one that wasn't about being a victim, but about surviving, fighting, and pushing forward, even when the world seemed set against him. "I got expelled from my school for questioning authority," he said, his voice growing more confident with every word. "And yeah, it hurt. But I'm not the only one. We all know students who've been told that they don't matter, that their voices don't count, that their futures don't matter." He looked up at the crowd now. There was no going back. "And let me tell you something else. Those kids, the ones who are constantly told they don't belong, they're the ones who are going to change the world." Jake spoke for 20 minutes, laying out his vision for the future of education. He talked about how the system was broken, about the kids who fell through the cracks, who didn't fit the mold, who were dismissed as troublemakers or failures. And the more he spoke, the more he saw the reaction. Eyes that were wide, heads nodding. People were listening. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, standing ovation. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, but this time, it was a good feeling. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had a voice, and people were finally hearing it. After the speech, a line of students came up to him, shaking his hand, giving him hugs. They were all thanking him, telling him how his words had changed something inside them. It was surreal. And then, just as the crowd started to thin, a woman in a sharp suit approached him. She had a name tag that read, "Senator Deborah Wells." "You're Jake Miller, right?" she asked, her voice low but friendly. Jake straightened up. "Yeah, that's me," she smiled. "I watched your speech, and I have to say, I'm impressed. The energy, the vision. You're a voice we need in Washington. I'd like to talk about a potential internship with my office." Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, you mean you want me to work with you?" The senator's smile didn't fade. "Yes, we need fresh perspectives, and you've got that." Jake's mind was spinning. An internship with a U.S. senator? That wasn't even on his radar a week ago. Later that evening, Jake stood on the balcony of the hotel room Dawson had secured for him. The city lights spread out before him like a sea of stars. His phone buzzed with notifications, messages of congratulations. People from across the country were reaching out. The world was starting to notice him. And the pressure? It was real. But Jake finally realized something. He was ready for it. He didn't have all the answers yet. He didn't know where this new path was going to lead, but he finally understood that he was in control of his own story now. Jake had barely settled back into the comfort of his hotel room when his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message of praise or congratulations. It was a news alert. Southridge Academy press statement. Jake Miller, expelled from Southridge Academy, continues to publicly criticize the school despite being removed from the institution. It is clear that his behavior, both prior to his expulsion and following, is a continued threat to the well-being of Southridge's reputation. We will pursue legal action if necessary to ensure this situation is resolved appropriately. Jake stared at the screen, a feeling of disbelief bubbling up inside him. Threat to the well-being of the school's reputation? He ran a hand through his hair. So that's how they were going to play it. It was no longer about the truth. It wasn't even about him. It was about their image. And Southridge wasn't about to let some kid from a farm ruin it. Back at Southridge, Principal Whitmore had called for an emergency meeting with the school board. The tension in the room was palpable. every board member staring at the screen showing Jake's recent speech in DC. They watched his words with narrowed eyes. "There's no way this kid is just going to let it go," one of the members said. "He's making waves and we've got to stop it before it turns into a tidal wave." "Legal action then?" another asked. "We can't let him continue these attacks on the school." Whitmore clenched his fists on the table. "It's not just about the lawsuits anymore. It's about discrediting him. We can't let his narrative take hold. We need to control this before it escalates." Meanwhile, across town, Lily and Noah were glued to their phones, watching the news unfold. Jake was everywhere. And Southridge's response, it was ugly. "They're going after him," Noah said, his voice tight. "This is bad." Lily was silent, her fingers tapping the screen. "We need to do something." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not going to let them do this. We can't just sit back and watch." Lily had always been the quiet one, in the background. But something about this moment made her snap. She wasn't going to let her best friend become a punching bag for a school that was too proud to admit it was wrong. That night, Jake sat in his room, his phone buzzing again, with a new flood of messages. It was a mix, some sympathetic, some angry, some confused. One of them, though, caught his eye. "Jake, you can't just let them do this. They're trying to make you look like the villain. You have a voice. You're not alone." MM. The message was from someone he didn't recognize, but it felt like a rallying cry. A whisper of hope in the middle of all the noise. At school the next morning, the atmosphere had changed. Students were whispering in the halls, gossiping, exchanging glances. The backlash was everywhere. Travis Harrington, wearing his usual cocky grin, stood by his locker, talking to a few of his friends. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Jake thinks he can just trash the school like that. Let him see what happens when he gets too big for his britches." Lily, passing by, shot him a glare. "You're disgusting." Travis's smile faltered. "What? You heard me. You think you're the big man on campus now, huh?" Lily crossed her arms. "Maybe you should think about how small you look, standing next to your father's name." The words stung and Travis's face reddened. "Shut up, Lily." "No, you shut up. All of you." She pointed around at the students who had been laughing behind his back. "You all think this is just a joke. You're wrong." Noah joined her side, standing shoulder to shoulder. "This is about justice, and you'll never get it by picking on someone who's finally fighting back." Back in Washington, Jake was trying to stay focused. He had meetings lined up with other educational reform advocates, all of whom were eager to hear his thoughts on the state of the education system. But through it all, the backlash from Southridge loomed in the back of his mind. He stared at the screen again, at the same press release that had caused his stomach to churn. The truth was, the longer Southridge pushed, the more Jake realized something important. They were scared. They were terrified of what he represented. Not just an expelled student, but a challenge to their very idea of what school was supposed to be. A reminder that everyone had a right to an education, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Late that night, Jake opened his laptop. He had been considering a bold move for a while, and now it was time, he typed. "When you're told your entire life that you don't belong, that your voice doesn't matter, you start to believe it. I did, at first. I believed I didn't have a place in a fancy school. But I was wrong. I do. Have a place, we all do. I'm not a villain. I'm just a kid who decided he had enough." He hit publish. Within minutes, the article was picked up by multiple outlets. The comments section exploded. Some were supportive, but others were laced with venom, accusing him of being ungrateful or worse. But Jake didn't care. He had a voice. And for the first time in his life, it wasn't being silenced. As the backlash from Southridge reached new heights, it was clear that Jake wasn't going to back down. In fact, he was only getting stronger. And as for the people at Southridge, the ones who thought they could control the narrative, they had another thing coming. Jake had never felt this tired before. It wasn't the kind of tired that came from working long hours on the farm. It wasn't the kind of tired you got from lack of sleep either. This was different. This was the kind of exhaustion that felt like it was sinking into his bones, into his very soul. Everywhere he went, there was a camera in his face. Every conversation had become an interrogation. Everyone wanted something from him. A soundbite, a quote, a victory. and it was starting to feel like it was all slipping through his fingers. The first sign of trouble came that Monday morning, when Jake checked his phone and found a text from Dawson. "Dude, they're coming after you in the press. They're digging into your family. Don't let them get in your head." Jake rubbed his temples. He hadn't even checked the news yet, but now a sinking feeling began to grow in his chest. He opened his news app. The first headline he saw was, from the National Review, Jake Miller, expelled student turns rebel, but at what cost? It wasn't the headline that got him. It was the quote they'd pulled from one of his speeches. "We need more voices. If you're told you don't belong, you might just be the one who changes the world." The context? Twisted. They'd taken his words, manipulated them to make him sound like an angry, entitled teenager who was fighting the system for no reason other than to make trouble. It made him feel small, ridiculous. Jake's phone buzzed again. It was from Lily. "Are you seeing this? They're even dragging your dad into it. They're saying your family's disruptive and unfit to be role models." Lily's message was followed by a screenshot of an article in the Daily News. Jake Miller's family. A history of disrespecting authority. Jake's stomach. Twisted. They were trying to ruin everything. They were coming after his family, the one thing that had always been his safe space. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the narrative they were trying to craft, and he was just a pawn in it. Dawson had been pushing Jake to go on another talk show, to stand up and defend himself. "The world's waiting for you to fight back, man," Dawson kept saying, but with each passing hour the pressure mounted. Jake was starting to wonder if it was worth it. By Wednesday, things had gotten out of control. Jake had just wrapped up another interview, this one for a podcast, and he felt like he was losing his grip. The hosts were kind. They seemed supportive, but it was hard to escape the way the world had started seeing him. A rebel, a troublemaker, a victim. In one conversation, a journalist had even asked him if he thought he was playing the part of the angry, misunderstood young man for publicity. It made him sick to his stomach. That afternoon, Jake went to a quiet park to think. It was the only place he could go to escape the madness for just a second. The trees swayed in the breeze, their leaves turning colors, but he didn't feel any peace. His phone buzzed again. It was an email from Principal Whitmore. "Jake, I'd appreciate it if you stopped using your personal platform to undermine the school's reputation. You have no idea how far-reaching the consequences of your actions could be. Please understand that your decision to escalate this matter is creating a toxic environment. I'm still open to discussing your return to Southridge, but only if you agree to apologize and refrain from further public attacks." The email hit him like a brick. He wasn't going to apologize. But did they really think he would just cave? He was tempted to respond right then and there, to tell Whitmore exactly where he could shove his apology. But something stopped him. "You're better than this," he reminded himself. "You're not just fighting for you. You're fighting for everyone." Jake spent the next hour thinking. The weight of it all, of the accusations, the headlines, the doubts, felt like a storm pressing down on him. But as he sat there, a realization began to form. They wanted him to break. They wanted him to snap, to give up, to apologize, to go back to the small, quiet corner where he had been before. But Jake wasn't that kid anymore. He wasn't just the farm kid who was kicked out of school. He was someone with a purpose now. And no matter how hard they pushed, he wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. That night, after hours of debating with himself, Jake did what he always did when he needed to clear his head. He wrote. He poured everything into his words, every ounce of frustration, fear, hope, and resolve. "This is bigger than me. It's bigger than Southridge, and it's bigger than my family. It's about what happens when we stop asking the questions that matter, when we stop challenging the people who are supposed to be guiding us. I'm not here to fight anyone. I'm here to tell the truth, and I'll keep telling it no matter how loud the noise gets." Jake Miller. The next morning, Jake's message was everywhere. Every social media platform, every news outlet. His words were raw, but they hit hard. And this time the response was different. The backlash from Southridge was still loud, but now more people were starting to rally behind him. Teachers, students, even some alumni who had once been silent, were speaking up. Jake didn't know how it would all turn out. He didn't know if he would win this battle or the next one, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let them break him. The morning after Jake's powerful post, things started to feel different. It wasn't just the overwhelming surge of support or the fact that his message was being shared far and wide. No, it was the way the pressure was shifting. Jake felt like he was walking on a tightrope, each step precarious. The messages were pouring in faster than he could keep up with, most of them supportive, some dismissive, and others downright hostile. But it was the hostility that bothered him. Not from Southridge, but from somewhere else. It started with a phone call. Jake was sitting in his room scrolling through his emails when his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, one he hadn't seen before. "Hello?" he answered, unsure of what to expect. "Jake Miller," the voice on the other end growled. "I don't think you know what you're really dealing with here." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The voice was cold, too smooth, and somehow threatening. "Who is this?" Jake asked, his tone guarded. "You don't need to know my name," the voice continued, "but I can tell you this. Your fight with Southridge? Hey, it's nothing compared to what's coming next, and if you're not careful, you'll find yourself swallowed whole." Jake's grip tightened around the phone. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to think long and hard about what you're doing," the voice said before hanging up abruptly. Jake stared at his phone, the words echoing in his mind. Swallowed whole. What was that supposed to mean? The next day, things took a strange turn. Jake was approached by one of the reporters from a major national news outlet, a man who had been following his story for weeks now. "Jake, I need to talk to you," the reporter said, his voice low and urgent. "I just got off the phone with someone who claims to have inside information about your case, someone who says you're being targeted by powerful people." Jake's brow furrowed. "Targeted? By who?" The reporter hesitated before speaking again. "I don't know the full details, but it's bigger than just Southridge. There's someone pulling the strings behind the scenes, and they've got a lot more money and influence than you could imagine." Jake's stomach turned. This was no longer about a school's reputation. This was something else entirely. Someone wanted him to fail, and they were willing to go to extreme lengths to make that happen. That night, Jake gathered with Lily, Noah, and Dawson in his hotel room. They'd been through the highs and lows of this journey together, but now things were getting darker. "I'm not sure what's going on," Jake said, rubbing his temples, "but I've got this weird feeling that they're about to come after me in ways I can't even imagine." Lily crossed her arms, her face serious. "You can't do this alone anymore. We need to get to the bottom of this." "Agreed," Noah said, his voice firm. "We'll find out who's behind all this. No one's going to pull the rug out from under you without a fight." But Jake was still hesitant. What if it's too dangerous? What if this person has more power than we can handle? Dawson leaned forward, a determined glint in his eyes. "Then we'll bring in more help. You're not alone in this. We've got your back." Jake took a deep breath. It was clear that whatever this new threat was, it wasn't something he could ignore. The stakes had just gotten a whole lot higher. The following days were filled with strange encounters. In the middle of the night, Jake received an anonymous package delivered to his hotel. It was a single photograph of him standing outside Southridge Academy with the words, "This is just the beginning." Jake's blood ran cold. Whoever was after him was watching. At the same time, the pressure from the media was intensifying. The stories were no longer just about his expulsion. Now they were questioning his integrity and motives. There were whispers about his background and his rise to fame, as if someone was actively working to paint him as a fraud. The tipping point came the day after a press conference Jake had attended, hoping to address some of the lies being spread about him. As he left the building, surrounded by reporters, a car suddenly sped past and nearly clipped him. Jake stumbled backward, heart pounding. That was no accident. He turned to Lily, who was standing nearby. "Did you see that?" Lily nodded. "That was intentional. Someone's trying to send a message." Dawson was already pulling out his phone. "We're getting security involved. This is escalating too quickly." Jake's thoughts raced. Whoever this was, they weren't just targeting him anymore. They were targeting everyone who stood by him. That night, as Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Every day, a new threat, a new attack. And the people pulling the strings behind the scenes were nowhere to be found. The next morning, Jake made a decision. It was time to fight back. He would no longer play the victim. He would expose whoever was behind this, and he wasn't going to back down until he had the answers. But little did Jake know the true enemy wasn't just trying to tear him down. They were setting up a trap. A trap that would make everything he'd fought for seem insignificant in comparison. Jake was no stranger to pressure. He had grown up with the weight of the farm, the responsibility of taking care of his family, the expectations of living up to something he never quite understood. But this was something different. Every time he thought he had a grip on the situation, something new would happen. A threat, a near miss, another false headline. Ad felt like he was being pulled in every direction, and the only thing he could count on was the feeling that someone was out to make him fail. The night before, Jake had decided. He was done waiting, done being the target. If someone was trying to ruin him, he was going to find them. With the help of Dawson and Lily, they began to dig into the details. They looked at the messages, the phone calls, the threats, and tried to find any clue that could lead them to the person orchestrating everything. They pored over social media, searched through the local news, and combed through every piece of correspondence. There was no stone left unturned. Then, late one evening, they found something strange. Lily was the one who discovered it. "Jake, look at this," she said, holding up her phone. "This doesn't make sense." Jake leaned over, her shoulder squinting at the screen. The post was from a local Southridge alumni page, and it was new. It had only been posted within the last hour. "We don't need someone like Jake Miller stirring things up. We've had enough of these kids who think they can just come in and start changing everything. Time to make sure they know their place. Southridge forever." The post had no name attached, no real clue as to who posted it. But what caught Jake's eye was the subtle way the post made him sound like an outsider, a threat to the established order. "This isn't just some random post," Jake muttered. "This is targeted." Dawson paced the room, his hands running through his hair. "What do they want, Jake? Why go through all this trouble to take you down?" "I don't know," Jake said, feeling the walls close in on him. "But I do know one thing. Someone doesn't want me to succeed, and they'll do anything to make sure I don't." The thought chilled him to his bones. But it wasn't until the next day that the true danger revealed itself. It was the middle of the afternoon when Jake received another call, this one more sinister than any before. The number was unknown, but Jake didn't hesitate. He answered. "You don't get it, do you?" the voice said, harsh and low. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? This is bigger than you. You're nothing more than a pawn in a game you don't understand, and if you keep pushing, you'll regret." Jake's heart raced. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, there was a long pause, followed by the sound of a click as the call ended. Jake stared at his phone, dread seeping in. Later that night, as the group gathered to review their findings, Dawson suggested they bring in someone who might have more experience dealing with this kind of thing. A private investigator. Jake had hesitated at first. He didn't want to make things worse, but Dawson was right. Whoever was behind this was playing a dangerous game, and it was time to get answers. They hired the investigator the next morning. 2 days passed, and things grew more tense. The investigator, Marissa, was thorough. She dug into the deeper networks surrounding Southridge Academy and the alumni. She went into the darker corners of the internet, searching for anyone who might have a reason to target Jake. Then, finally, the breakthrough came. Marissa called Jake late one night, her voice grim. "Jake, I've found something. The people behind this aren't just some disgruntled alumni or random students. They're connected to something much bigger. I traced the patterns and everything points to someone with deep ties to Southridge's funding." Jake's pulse quickened. "Who?" "The name I found." Marissa hesitated. "It's Harold Klein." Jake had heard the name before. Klein was a well-known figure in the local business world. He had a reputation for controlling everything around him, from investments to charity organizations. But what did he have to do with Jake? "You're sure?" Jake asked, trying to hold his voice steady. "I'm positive. And if you think this is just about you, think again. Klein has a lot of influence, and if he's behind this, It's not just Southridge on the line. He's manipulating a lot more than that. Jake clenched his fists. What do we do now? Marissa's voice softened. You need to be careful. This is no longer just about your fight with the school. You're dealing with someone who has the power to destroy everything. And they won't hesitate to do so if it means protecting their interests. The next few days were a blur of tension. Jake felt as though he was walking into a trap, one that was carefully set, and now he was the prey, but he wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about the school anymore. This was about exposing the people who thought they could control the narrative, who thought they could tear him apart for their own gain. That night, Jake and his team gathered one last time. We need to confront Klein, Jake said, his voice resolute. I'm not going to let him pull the strings anymore. Lily nodded, determined. We'll do it together, no matter what happens. As they prepared to face off against Klein, none of them could have predicted the twists and turns that would come next. Jake's journey was about to take a dangerous, high-stakes turn, and what lay ahead would test everything he had fought for. Jake's heart raced as he stood outside, the towering glass building that housed Harold Klein's private office. The sleek, cold exterior reflected the sunset, but Jake didn't feel any warmth. He wasn't here for pleasantries. He was here for answers. Lily, Dawson, and Noah stood with him, their expressions grim. They knew this was a dangerous move, but there was no turning back now. This is crazy, Dawson muttered, glancing up at the building. We're really doing this. Confronting Klein, of all people. We don't have a choice, Jake said, his voice steady but filled with tension. I have to end this. Whatever Klein is trying to do, we can't let him get away with it. Lily put a hand on his shoulder. We're with you, Jake. Let's go in there and figure this out. Jake nodded, steeling himself for what was ahead. They walked into the building and made their way to the elevator, which took them up to the top floor. As the doors opened, Jake felt a sudden chill wash over him. Klein's office was pristine, immaculate. The entire floor had an air of power, of control. Klein was a man who didn't do things halfway, and the building itself was a reflection of that. The receptionist at the front desk barely looked up when they entered. Do you have an appointment? She asked, her voice flat. Jake leaned over the desk. Tell Klein I'm here. It's urgent. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone and spoke into it quietly. A moment later, she hung up and motioned for them to follow her down a long hallway. At the end of the hallway, a heavy wooden door stood in front of them. The receptionist knocked once before opening it. Mr. Klein will see you now. Jake stepped forward, his pulse quickening. This was it, the moment he'd been building up to for weeks. Inside the office, Harold Klein was seated at a massive mahogany desk, looking every bit the corporate titan that Jake had heard about. His dark, sharp eyes flicked up when they entered, sizing up Jake and his team with the calculated coldness of someone who had spent his life manipulating situations to his advantage. You must be Jake Miller, Klein said, his voice smooth and commanding. I've been expecting you. Jake didn't take a seat. He wasn't here to play games. Cut the act, Klein. I know you're behind this, behind everything, the threats, the smear campaigns, everything. Klein smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know they hold all the cards. You really think you're special, don't you? You think this is personal? Jake's fists clenched. I think you've been pulling strings from behind the scenes, trying to ruin my life. Why? What's your end game? Klein leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. You're just a pawn, Jake. A very noisy, very persistent pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. Jake's eyes narrowed. What do you want from me? Why are you doing this? Klein's smile widened. What I want, Jake, is simple. Control. You've been a disruption, something I wasn't prepared for. Southridge has been a reliable institution for years, and you came along and threatened to tear it all down with your little crusade. Jake's jaw tightened. So it's about the school? You're trying to protect it? Klein shook his head, slowly. No, it's about something much bigger than that. It's about the future of the elite, the future of power. People like you don't understand what's at stake. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're really just in the way. Jake's heart pounded as Klein's words sank in. This wasn't about the school. This wasn't just about Jake's expulsion or the media circus. This was about something much larger, something that Jake wasn't even close to understanding yet. "So, what now?" Jake asked, his voice tense. "What do you plan to do with me? Are you going to finish what you started?" Klein's expression softened, but the coldness never left his eyes. "Oh, Jake, I don't need to finish anything. You're already out of the game. This is bigger than you can imagine. The only question now is whether you're going to keep fighting a battle you can't win, or if you'll walk away." Jake felt the weight of Klein's words. For the first time in weeks, doubt began to creep in. Klein had power, real power. He wasn't just some rich businessman. He was the power behind the curtain, the one who pulled the strings of institutions, of reputations, of people's lives. But Jake wasn't about to let Klein win. Not without a fight. "I'm not walking away," Jake said, his voice steady. "I didn't come this far to back down now." Klein chuckled softly. "We'll see how long your resolve lasts. You can't beat an empire like mine, Jake. No one can." Jake's mind raced. Klein was trying to break him, trying to make him feel powerless. But Jake knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to be intimidated. He had something Klein couldn't control, his truth. "I'm not afraid of you," Jake said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "And I won't stop until everyone knows what you've been doing." Klein's smile faltered for just a second, then returned, sharper than before. "You're persistent, I'll give you that, but persistence alone won't save you. Just..." Then a soft chime interrupted the tension in the room. Klein's eyes flicked to his phone. He read the message quickly, then looked up at Jake, his smile now thin and malicious. "You've been a thorn in my side, Jake. But I think you've just made your situation much worse." Jake felt a cold sweat break out along his spine. Something was wrong. The door behind them opened suddenly, and two heavily armed men stepped into the room. Klein didn't even flinch. "Time to go, Jake," he said with chilling calmness. "You've overstayed your welcome." Jake's heart raced as the two armed men moved toward him. Their presence wasn't just a threat, it was an ultimatum. Klein's office, once filled with corporate grandeur, now felt like a cage. Every movement, every breath, seemed to tighten the noose around him. Lily, Dawson, and Noah didn't flinch. They were right behind him, their eyes scanning for any opportunity to fight back, but even they knew they were outmatched. The men were professionals, trained for situations like this. It wasn't just intimidation. They were making a statement. "You've made a huge mistake, Jake," Klein said, his voice cool, almost casual. "This wasn't just about you. It's about protecting what's mine. You don't get to destroy that just because you want to play hero." Jake gritted his teeth, refusing to show fear. The adrenaline was pumping through his veins, but there was no time for panic. His mind was racing, trying to figure out his next move. "Is this how it ends, then?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "I came here to confront you, not to become your next casualty." Klein didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the two men who were now flanking Jake and his friends. They stood silent, waiting for orders, and the tension in the room grew thicker with each passing second. "You're not going to make it out of here, Jake," Klein said slowly, standing up from his desk. "This whole thing, everything you've done, has been a game, and you're losing." Jake swallowed his fear. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when the truth was so close to the surface. "What's the game, Klein?" Jake asked, his voice low but sharp. "What do you really want?" Klein smiled faintly. "I want control. I want everything to stay the way it's always been. This town, this school, everything. I've been building something for a long time, Jake, and you've been a little too loud for my liking." Jake took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what are you willing to do to keep it all? Threaten me? Hurt me? Is that really the kind of person you are?" For the first time, Klein's smile faded. "You think you're so much better than me, but you have no idea what it takes to make the world turn. People like you always think they can change things, but you won't. You'll fail just like everyone else who tried before you." Jake didn't say anything. He could feel the weight of Klein's words, but they didn't matter anymore. The fear, the uncertainty, it was all gone. He was standing on the edge of something bigger now. One of the armed men moved toward Jake, his hand resting on the grip of his gun. He was clearly ready to act. But Jake wasn't about to go down without a fight. The moment the man raised his hand to grab Jake's arm, Dawson reacted. Faster than anyone could react, he lunged forward, tackling the man to the ground. The room erupted into chaos as Noah and Lily rushed forward, attempting to defend themselves. The second armed man drew his weapon, but before he could take aim, Jake threw himself into the fray. "Run!" Dawson shouted to Lily and Noah. "Go, Jake!" Wasn't sure what he was doing anymore. He was too focused on the fight. He had to survive, he had to get out. The odds were stacked against them, but they couldn't give up. Not yet. Klein stood by, watching the chaos unfold with a cold detachment. "I've had enough of this," he said quietly, as though the unfolding wasn't even worth his time. Then, with a small gesture, he snapped his fingers. "Call security!" A hidden speaker in the corner of the room buzzed to life, and suddenly the door swung open, revealing a handful of security officers rushing into the office. The sound of footsteps echoed, and it was clear the odds had just turned against them. Dawson struggled to hold the first man down, his hands trying to keep the gun away from him. Noah and Lily fought off the second man, using everything they had to break free. But the officers were closing in fast. Jake's mind raced. They needed a way out, and fast. But the doors were already sealed. The security was tightening their hold. They were trapped. "Jake!" Lily shouted from across the room. She was backed into a corner, struggling to avoid the armed man who was closing in on her. Without thinking, Jake grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it at the officer nearest to him. The chair struck him square in the chest, throwing him back against the wall. That was enough of a distraction. Jake sprinted toward Lily, shoving one of the security guards out of the way. "We need to move now," Jake yelled. Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. She grabbed Noah's arm and pulled him along, her eyes scanning the room for an exit. The group rushed toward the door, fighting off anyone who got in their way. The security officers were trying to regain control, but the chaos was only getting worse. Jake could feel the walls closing in again, but he wasn't going to stop. As they neared the exit, a voice rang out from behind them. "Let them go, they'll be dealt with later." Klein's voice echoed through the room, but there was no mistaking the bitterness behind it. "They think they've won, but they're wrong." Jake didn't look back. He didn't need to. They finally burst out into the hallway, their hearts pounding. They didn't stop running until they reached the elevator and hit the button for the ground floor. "Get to the car," Jake said, his voice ragged. "We need to get out of here." As the elevator doors closed, they all exchanged looks of exhaustion and disbelief. They had made it out, barely. But the danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The car sped through the streets, tires screeching as they made sharp turns. Inside, Jake's mind was still racing, barely registering the world passing by outside. The window. He could feel his pulse hammering in his temples, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. But his thoughts were on the conversation they had just had with Harold Klein. Klein was cold, calculating, and terrifyingly powerful, but Jake had realized something in those tense moments. Klein wasn't alone. What now? Lily's voice broke through Jake's thoughts. She was sitting in the passenger seat, glancing at him with concern. Jake didn't immediately answer. His gaze was fixed ahead, his mind replaying the events that had just unfolded. They had barely escaped the clutches of Klein's security, and he wasn't sure how much longer they could stay ahead of him. Klein had let them go, but why? What was his endgame? Jake had been sure that Klein had wanted to end the whole thing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else going on, something even darker. "We need to figure out who else is involved," Jake said, his voice tense. "Klein's not the only one behind this. There's more to this story." Dawson, sitting in the back seat, leaned forward, his face grave. "I don't like the way he looked at us. Like we were just another problem to deal with." "He has something planned, Jake, and we're part of it." Noah, who had been unusually quiet until now, spoke up. "We need to get to the bottom of this. Klein can't be allowed to control everything. There's too much at stake." Jake nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know, we need to dig deeper, find out what Klein's really up to, but we have to be careful. He's already shown us he's willing to use force." The car veered off the main road and into a quiet neighborhood. Jake was trying to think of their next move when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text message from an unknown number. You're playing a dangerous game, Jake. Keep digging and you'll uncover things you won't be able to stop. Jake's heart skipped a beat. His fingers hovered over the screen, but he didn't reply. He couldn't afford to reveal too much just yet. Who was that? Lily asked, her eyes narrowing. She had noticed the text too. Someone who knows. What's going on? Jake muttered, his grip tightening on the phone. But I don't trust them. Whoever it is, they're trying to warn me off. We can't stop now, Dawson said, his voice resolute. We're in this too deep, and we can't back down. Jake's mind was spinning. Whoever had sent the message had knowledge that could help them, but it was clear that they were playing a dangerous game too. He couldn't afford to be anyone's pawn. They needed answers, but they had to be cautious. The group decided to take refuge at Dawson's family cabin, a secluded spot up in the mountains. It was the perfect place to lay low and plan their next steps. The cabin was remote, with no one around for miles, and it gave them the peace they needed to think as the ideal sunset behind the mountains. They sat around the small, cozy living room brainstorming ideas. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Klein was just the tip of the iceberg. There was something deeper going on, something that was tying Klein's empire to the town, to the school, and maybe even to the people who had been trying to destroy Jake's reputation. I've been thinking, Noah said suddenly, his eyes focused on the ground. It's not just about the school, is it? Klein's been pulling the strings here for years, but this goes way beyond that. Think about it. He's always had influence over local businesses, over the law. But now this is about something much bigger. Lily looked up from the stack of papers she was organizing. Bigger than Southridge? What do you mean? Noah sighed. I think Klein is building something, an empire, and we're caught right in the middle of it. We've all seen how the school has been run, how it's protected people in power while crushing anyone who dares to stand up to them. But I don't think that's the full picture. It's not just the school, it's the people Klein's been dealing with. Jake leaned forward, listening intently. You're saying Klein's connected to something bigger than the school? Noah nodded slowly. Yes, there are other players involved, people we haven't even noticed, but they're the ones giving Klein his power. And we've got to figure out who they are before it's too late. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. The group froze, their hearts skipping a beat. Who the hell is that? Dawson whispered, his eyes scanning the room. Jake quickly moved to the window and peered outside. He saw a car parked by the driveway, but there were no headlights. Whoever it was, they weren't here by accident. Stay low, Jake said, motioning. For the others to get into position, they moved into the shadows, watching the door. Another knock came, louder this time. Jake cautiously approached the door, his breath steady. He had no idea who was on the other side, but he knew it wasn't a coincidence that they had shown up now. He opened the door, and standing there was someone none of them had expected. Detective Harper, the same detective who had been investigating the incident surrounding Jake's expulsion. What do you want? Jake asked, his voice low, guarded. Harper gave him a tired, resigned look. I'm not here to cause trouble. In fact, I'm here to help. The air was thick with tension as Detective Harper stood on the other side of the door. The dim light from inside the cabin cast long shadows across her face, making her look even more mysterious and unreadable. Jake's instincts screamed for caution, but something in Harper's eyes made him hesitate. She wasn't here to arrest them, not this time. Detective Harper, Jake said cautiously, his voice low. Why are you here? The last time we spoke you were investigating me. Harper glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure they weren't being followed, before stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The door creaked shut behind her. The group stood in stunned silence, unsure of how to react to this unexpected visitor. I'm not here to make things worse for you, Harper said, lowering her voice. I've been watching Klein for a while, but I couldn't get close enough until now. Watching Klein, Dawson repeated, his brow furrowing. So you've known all along? Harper nodded slowly. I've known there's something wrong in this town for a long time. I've been investigating Klein's operations, his business, dealings, his influence, and his connection to the school. But he's been careful, too careful. Every lead I've had has been either blocked or erased. Why come to us now? Lily asked, her voice skeptical. We're the last people you should trust. Harper looked at Lily, then at each of them in turn. Because you're the only ones making any headway. Klein thinks he can control everything. But you've been digging deeper than anyone else, and now you're a target. You need to know what you're up against." Jake exchanged a glance with his friends. They had spent the last few days piecing together what little information they could find. But everything had been scattered like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. If Harper was right, and Klein's operation was as deep as she claimed, they needed more than just their wits to survive. "We've been trying to figure out who else is involved," Jake said, crossing his arms. "But it's hard to know who to trust. Klein's not the only one pulling strings. There are others behind him, and we think they're tied to the school." Harper took a deep breath, as though bracing herself for what she was about to reveal. "You're right," she said quietly. "And it's worse than you think. The people Klein is working with aren't just businessmen. They have political connections, law enforcement, even people in positions of power in this town. It's a network, a dangerous one." Dawson's eyes widened. "You mean Klein's got people in the police department?" Harper nodded grimly. "Exactly. People in every corner of this town are on his payroll, and it's not just Southridge. This reaches beyond the borders of this town. This is bigger than anything you're imagining." The weight of her words hung heavily in the room. Jake felt a chill creep down his spine. Klein's empire was more extensive than they could have ever realized, but there was still something he couldn't shake. Why was Harper here now? Why? Was she offering them help? "I don't get it," Noah said, shaking his head. "If you've known all along, why didn't you do something about it sooner?" Harper looked down at the floor for a moment as if gathering her thoughts. When she looked up again, there was a hardness in her eyes. "Because every time I got close to Klein, things got complicated. People got hurt. The more I dug, the more powerful and dangerous he became. I couldn't expose him without bringing down a whole network of people who would stop at nothing to protect him." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Harper was right. Klein's influence wasn't just in the open, it was buried in layers of corruption, hidden behind layers of power that could be easily destroyed if someone like Harper or even Jake pushed too hard. They needed to approach this carefully, or they could lose everything. "So, you're just handing us the keys to the kingdom?" Lily asked, her skepticism evident. "You expect us to take down Klein with your help?" Harper shook her head, her expression serious. "No, I'm not handing you anything, but I'm giving you the tools to fight back. You're already in this, whether you like it or not, and you're going to need someone on the inside. That's why I'm here." Jake felt a surge of frustration. They were already so deep into this mess. But if what Harper said was true, they had no choice but to accept her offer. "We need to move quickly," Jake said, taking control of the situation. "We need a plan. Klein isn't going to stop coming after us. We need to expose him before he can bury us all." Harper nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "I agree. But we need to be smart. Klein has resources. He has eyes everywhere. One wrong move and you could be signing your own death sentence." They spent the next few hours laying out a plan. Harper gave them the information she had gathered over the years, bits and pieces that hadn't made sense until now. Jake and his friends took notes, their minds working overtime to piece together the puzzle. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how far-reaching Klein's control was. As they worked, Harper left them with one final piece of advice. "You'll need to be careful. Not everyone in town is an enemy. Some people will help you, but they'll be watching too. Trust is a luxury you can't afford right now." With that, she stood up, ready to leave. "I'll be in touch," she said before walking out the door into the dark night. As the sound of her footsteps faded, Jake turned to his friends, his expression grim. "We've got one shot at this. We can't mess up." Lily nodded. "I'm in. Let's do this." Dawson looked at Noah, then back at Jake. No backing down now. Jake knew the road ahead was going to be long and dangerous, but they had no choice. They had to stop Klein before it was too late. The next few days were a whirlwind of research, calls, and quiet discussions behind closed doors. Jake and his friends had no time to waste. They were now up against a machine much bigger and more powerful than they'd ever anticipated. Klein's network was everywhere, its tendrils reaching into every corner of their town and beyond. They couldn't trust anyone, not even those they thought they knew. Sitting around the cabin's small dining table, The group pored over everything they had gathered. The old wood creaked under the weight of their plans. Everyone was tense, their eyes glued to the papers spread across the table. "This is insane," Dawson muttered, shaking his head as he read through a list of local businesses allegedly connected to Klein. "It's not just the school. He's controlling the entire town. All these companies, all these people, they're either in on it or terrified of him." Lily ran her fingers through her hair, frustration evident on her face. "So how do we even begin to untangle this? We have no resources, no power. We're just kids." Jake's gaze was sharp as he scanned the names on the list. "We don't need power, we need leverage. Klein might control this town, but he can't control everything. We need to find the one thing he's afraid of." Noah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I think I've found something," he said, pointing to a name on a different document. "This is one of Klein's biggest investors, Robert Hawke. His company is involved in everything from local real estate to tech startups. He's the kind of guy who doesn't just play the game, he creates the rules." Jake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who is he?" "No one knows much about him," Noah continued. "But what we do know is that he's never been in the public eye. He works behind the scenes, pulling the strings from the shadows, and he's got a reputation for doing whatever it takes to get what he wants." Dawson looked up from the papers. "So you're saying Klein is just a front for this guy? Hawke is the real power behind everything?" "That's what it looks like," Jake replied, rubbing his temples. "But we still don't have enough to make a move. Klein's not going to go down without a fight, and we're running out of time." Suddenly the door creaked open. Everyone froze. "Who's there?" Jake called out, standing up, his heart racing. His first thought was that Klein had found them, but then he saw a familiar face in the doorway. It was Detective Harper. Her expression was grim, her eyes scanning the room warily. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice low. "Harper?" Dawson asked, disbelief in his voice. "You're back. What did you find?" Harper stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. "I've got news," she said, lowering her voice. "But it's not good." Jake's stomach dropped. He motioned for everyone to sit down. "What is it?" Harper took a deep breath. "I've been digging into Robert Hawke. I have some sources inside the police department who've been feeding me information. Hawke's more than just an investor. He's the key to everything." Lily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Harper hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Hawke has been working with Klein for years, but what's worse, he's connected to a much larger operation. There's a major black market ring operating right under our noses. Weapons, drugs, human trafficking, you name it. And Klein's been helping to funnel everything through the school, using students as pawns." The room fell silent. The revelation hit them like a ton of bricks. What they had thought was just about Klein's grip on the town was far more sinister than they could have imagined. This wasn't just about control. It was about profit, violence, and exploitation on a scale they couldn't even begin to fathom. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "Are you saying Klein and Hawke are involved in that?" Harper nodded, her eyes dark with the weight of her words. "Yes, but it's not just them. They've been working with people high up in law enforcement, in local government, people who are supposed to protect us. They've been covering for this operation for years, turning a blind eye as long as the money kept flowing." Noah stood up, pacing nervously. "This is insane. We're talking about people we've known our entire lives, people who are supposed to be keeping us safe." Dawson slammed his fist on the table. "How could no one know about this? How is it possible that this has been happening under our noses?" Harper's face was grim. "That's the problem. Everyone who tried to stop them either disappeared or was silenced in some way. This is a web, and the more you try to unravel it, the tighter it gets. The more you expose, the more dangerous it becomes." Jake looked around at his friends, each of them processing the information in their own way. The fear was palpable in the room. This wasn't just a fight for their futures. It was a battle for their lives. "So, what now?" Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to get evidence," Jake said, standing tall, his resolve hardening. "If we expose this operation, it's over for Klein and Hawke. We need to find a way to get to them without tipping them off." But just as Jake was about to continue, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, and his face went pale as he looked. at the screen. The message was short and chilling. "You're getting too close. Back off or there will be consequences." The message was signed simply, Hawk. A cold shiver ran down Jake's spine. He looked up at his friends who were staring at him with wide eyes. "They know we're coming," Jake said, his voice tight. "This just got a whole lot more dangerous." The days that followed were tense. Every moment felt like a countdown, and the stakes kept rising with each passing hour. Jake could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The message from Hawk wasn't just a warning, it was a threat, a clear sign that they were now playing a game with no rules, and the consequences for losing were deadly. The group met in the cabin once again, their faces pale and tight with worry. They had been trying to dig deeper into Klein and Hawk's operation, but each step forward felt like they were sinking deeper into a pit of danger they might never escape. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to make the next move," Dawson said, his voice tense as he flipped through the files they had gathered. "We need to act before they come after us." Jake rubbed his eyes, the exhaustion starting to settle in. "We don't have a choice. If we don't expose them now, Klein and Hawk will bury us. But we can't afford to make a mistake." Noah, pacing nervously, stopped and looked at Jake. "What if it's too late already? What if they've already been watching us this whole time?" "I don't think they know everything yet," Jake said, trying to stay calm. "But if they catch wind of what we're doing, we won't stand a chance." Lily's voice was quiet but resolute. "So, what's the plan? How do we get the evidence we need without getting caught?" Jake looked around at his friends. They had come so far, but they were at a crossroads. The information they had was damning, but it was scattered and incomplete. They needed to put everything together, but the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. "I've got a contact inside one of Hawk's companies." Harper's voice cut through the tension, and everyone turned to face her. She had been working behind the scenes, gathering whatever information she could without drawing attention. "He's a low-level guy, but he's been feeding me details about the operation. He's scared, though. Hawk's men have been watching him. If we go too public, he'll be in danger." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. "So we use him as a source. That's risky." Harper nodded. "I know, but it's the only shot we've got. We can't take down Hawk without solid proof, and this guy has access to everything." Dawson stood up, clearly agitated. "So we put this guy in the line of fire. We don't even know if we can trust him." Harper's face hardened. "We don't have the luxury of trust anymore. The only way we can win this is by taking the risk. We expose Hawk and Klein, and we do it fast, before they come for us." Jake turned the idea over in his mind, weighing the risks. It was a dangerous move, but they were already in too deep to back out now. If they didn't expose everything soon, there was no telling how much damage Klein and Hawk would do. "We'll do it," Jake said finally, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the decision. "But we need to be smart about it, no mistakes." Later that night, they met with Harper's contact in a dimly lit alley behind a small diner, far from prying eyes. The man was jittery, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if he feared someone might be watching. "Are you sure about this?" the man asked, his voice low. "If Hawk finds out I'm talking to you—" "We know the risks," Harper said, her tone cutting through his fear. "But we need the truth. What do you have for us?" The man hesitated, looking from one face to another, his eyes wide with paranoia. "It's all in the company's files. Financials, emails, phone records, you name it. They've been laundering money through businesses in the town, paying off local officials to keep everything under wraps." Jake's heart raced as he processed the information. This was it, the evidence they needed to take down Klein and Hawk once and for all. "Where are these files?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the rising tension. The man looked around nervously, then lowered his voice to a whisper. "There's a safe in Hawk's office. It's locked up tight, but if you get access to it, everything you need will be in there." Lily, who had been standing close by, took a step forward. "How do we get into the safe?" "I can get you the code," the man said quickly, "but you'll need to move fast. They're onto me. If I don't get out of here soon, I'm dead." Harper stepped forward, pulling out a small envelope from her coat pocket. "This will help you disappear," she said, handing it to the man. "Go somewhere safe, and don't contact us again. You've done your part." The man took the envelope, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. "You better be ready to act. Hawk won't go down without a fight." With that, he quickly disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jake and his friends with the heavy burden of what they had just agreed to do. Back at the cabin, they discussed their next steps. The plan was clear. Get into Hawk's office, retrieve the files, and expose everything. But even as Jake went over the details in his mind, a gnawing feeling of unease took hold of him. They were taking a huge risk, and they had no idea how far Hawk and Klein would go to protect themselves. As the night wore on, Jake's phone buzzed again, the same chilling message from Hawk appearing on the screen. "You think you can stop me? You're already too late." Jake's blood ran cold. He showed the message to the others, his face pale. "We're running out of time," he muttered, his voice filled with urgency. "It's now or never." The air in the cabin was thick with anticipation. Jake could feel the tension in his chest. As he paced back and forth, the weight of the plan bearing down on him. This was it, the final push. After everything they'd uncovered, after all the sacrifices, it was now or never. They had the evidence, but it wouldn't matter unless they acted fast. His mind raced as he thought about the risks. Hawk and Klein wouldn't just let them expose their operation. They'd do anything to stop them. Jake knew they were already in too deep, but there was no turning back now. If they didn't go after the truth now, they might never get another chance. "So, we all clear on the plan?" Jake asked, looking around at his friends. Each of them wore an expression of grim determination. Noah nodded, his face pale but resolved. "We hit Hawk's office tonight. We'll get the files, make sure they're copied, and get out. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We do this clean." Harper, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "I'll provide the distraction. I've got a few contacts who can help. The fewer people who know about this, the better." Lily clenched her fists, her expression fierce. "We've come this far, we're not backing down now." Dawson's eyes flicked to the clock. "Time's running out. If we don't move now, we'll lose our shot. I'll stay close to the exit and make sure no one catches us. We can't afford to get caught." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "All right, let's do this." The night was eerily quiet as they made their way through the darkened streets. The world outside seemed to be holding its breath, as if the town itself knew that something big was about to happen. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an almost supernatural glow over everything. Harper led the way, her footsteps light but purposeful. She had arranged everything, every detail, every distraction. The others followed close behind, their nerves tightly wound. When they reached Hawk's building, they paused in the shadows, watching the entrance. The building loomed over them, a cold, imposing structure that seemed to be hiding far more than they could imagine. "This is it," Jake said quietly, his voice low but firm. "We get in, we get out, fast." They moved like shadows, slipping through the back entrance of the building as Harper signaled to a group of her contacts on the other side of the street. The distraction was set in motion. An alarm would go off at a nearby office, drawing attention away from Hawk's headquarters for just enough time to slip inside undetected. The plan was risky, but they had no choice. The clock was ticking. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. They moved through the hallways, every step echoing in the silence. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in on them, as if the building knew they didn't belong there. They reached the office door and Harper motioned for them to wait. She would check for any signs of security. A tense minute passed. Finally, she gave them the signal. All clear. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward and carefully turned the doorknob. The door opened with a soft creak, and they slipped inside. Hawk's office was lavish, expensive wood paneling, plush furniture, a massive desk covered with papers and documents. But none of that mattered. Jake's eyes were fixed on one thing, the safe in the corner of the room. "We need to move fast," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "Get the code, Dawson. The rest of us will start gathering the files." Dawson quickly approached the safe, his fingers trembling as he entered the code Harper's contact had provided. The lock clicked open, and Jake's breath caught in his throat as the door swung wide. Inside, it was everything they needed: financial records, photos, confidential emails, evidence of Klein and Hawk's operation. Jake quickly grabbed everything he could, shoving it into a folder. But as he was about to turn, he heard a soft sound, the faintest click of a door closing behind them. "Stay calm," Harper whispered. Jake's blood ran cold. Someone was here. They were too late. "Move," Jake hissed. "We've got to go." The door to the office burst open and two men in suits stepped inside. Their eyes locked onto the group, and a chill ran down Jake's spine. The men didn't hesitate. They knew exactly who Jake and his friends were, and they weren't here for a conversation. "Get them," one of the men shouted, lunging forward. Jake's heart pounded. They were out of time. The group scattered. Dawson and Lily ran toward the back exit, but Jake and Noah were trapped. They had nowhere to go. "Get to the files," Jake shouted. "We have to get them out of here." The men moved toward them, their hands reaching for the guns at their sides. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't think about anything other than getting the files to safety. They had to make it out alive. They couldn't let Hawk win. In that moment, Jake saw something out of the corner of his eye. A glint of metal. A flash of movement. A shot rang out. The next few moments felt like an eternity. Everything happened so fast. Jake dove to the side, Noah right behind him. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and they could hear the men cursing as they scrambled to take cover. But just as quickly as the chaos erupted, something changed. The door to the office burst open again, and a loud voice rang out. "Enough!" Harper stepped forward, her gun aimed at the men. "Move! Now!" The two men froze, their eyes wide with shock. They hadn't expected this. Harper's eyes never left them as she spoke again. "If you value your lives, you'll let these kids go. Now." The tension was unbearable as the two men exchanged glances. Finally, one of them nodded, signaling the other to back off. Slowly, they lowered their weapons and retreated. Harper didn't lower her gun until the men were out of sight. Jake exhaled sharply, his heart still racing. He couldn't believe they'd made it out alive. "We've got what we came for," Harper said, her voice steady but cold. "Now let's go." As they ran out of the building and into the night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Klein and Hawk weren't going to go down without a fight, but they had the evidence. And that was the first step toward ending their reign of terror. Epilogue. A new dawn. The news spread like wildfire. What had once been a quiet town was now at the center of a national scandal. Klein's empire came crashing down, and Hawk's network was exposed for all the world to see. It wasn't easy. There were people who didn't want the truth to come out, and not everyone made it out unscathed. But Jake and his friends had done it. They'd fought for what was right, and they had won. As Jake sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunrise, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. It wasn't over yet, but they had taken the first step toward a brighter future, and with that the town could finally begin to heal. The story ends here. Thanks for reading this thrilling journey with Jake and his friends. What's the one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Leave a comment below and let us know. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe for more.